What's up? It's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and today I'm going to be talking about Patrick Vieira, who has recently been linked to the U.S. men's national team job as the coach. Reports say that he's been contacted about the position and he's interested in taking the job. Now, Vieira is an amazing player. He's a legend of the game, captained the Arsenal Invincible team, won a World Cup with France, and was probably involved with the most high-profile Roy Keane feud. But as a manager, he got a job with Man City in their developmental squad. He turned that into a job with NYCFC as part of the City Football Group before taking a job at Nice and then ending up at Crystal Palace. And you can see the jersey up there. I'm a Crystal Palace fan. I've been watching this guy for years now, so I want to talk about how I think he'd do as a manager for the U.S. Vieira took over Palace at the start of the 21-22 season. I thought he had a very solid first season at Crystal Palace. A typical league finish for us. He was able to finish comfortably above the relegation zone, and it wasn't a worry throughout the whole season, which is very good by Crystal Palace's standard. But more importantly, he went on a very good FA Cup run, reaching the semi-finals before he lost to Chelsea. And I will say that if Conor Gallagher was allowed to play, we probably would have won that game. I'm not still bitter about it or anything. But then next season, things got a little bit worse. To start out, there was a pretty rocky preseason that was out of his control. And the team kind of stumbled for a bit. And while we were still in 12th, relegation looked like it was looming, and he was fired and replaced by Roy Hodgson. Now, I will say that the run of games that Vieira had prior to getting fired was kind of a gauntlet, and then Roy Hodgson came in with a stretch of very easy, winnable games. But the team did look a lot better under Roy Hodgson, so I feel like we should keep that in mind. But despite saying that, I did like Crystal Palace while they played under Vieira. I was a fan of his tactics, I liked the style of play, and I think we were doing a good job up until, well, we weren't. I enjoyed Vieira's tactics while he's at Crystal Palace. The team would typically line up in a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1, which seemed to be the formations that worked the best for the U.S. men's national team, and I enjoyed the style of play. While obviously being Crystal Palace, you're not going to be able to control play or dominate possession that much, especially against some of the better teams in the league. Crystal Palace was committed to building out the back. Vieira brought in two center backs, Ngehie and Anderson, who did very well at that aspect. And it was some good attacking play, especially in terms of the creativity displayed by some of our forwards. Zaha, Olise, and Eze in particular. I'm going to be saying those three a lot. Just the creativity that they showed in their attack with dribbling, taking players on, some of the combinations, some of the great passes that they made. It just made Crystal Palace a really fun team to watch when everything was going, and just a really exciting team. And in addition, there was a pretty good press that Vieira had for the team. It wasn't as crazy as Leeds or anything like that, but the team could do some press, and it was a really attacking side for a team that, well, Hodgson had been there 4 years previously to Vieira, and he took over after Vieira was fired, but it was a lot more attacking than Roy Hodgson had been with the side, and it was pretty fun to watch. Now, there are some things that maybe it was just Vieira was adjusting to Crystal Palace that wasn't really a style of play, in particular, like the creativity of guys on the field. He wasn't even the one who bought Zaha's been there. He didn't buy Eze. He bought Elise, but that was just kind of an easy pickup. He was so good. So I don't know if that's really his style of play or if it was just he happened to have good players at his disposal, but it was still something that I really enjoyed. And for the U.S., a team that has lacked creativity at times, can be a bit stagnant, I think having a manager who's able to unleash players like that could be really fun and something to be interested in. In addition, there are some other things where it's like, is that part of his tactical style, or is just that him adjusting to Crystal Palace? Like, we didn't attack with our fullbacks as much as some other teams. They'd get forward somewhat, but certainly not as much as like some of the more high-profile wingbacks in the league. But that might have just been due to Tyreek Mitchell being more defensive, Joel Ward and Nathaniel Klein not being too adventurous going forward. So that's tough to say. I do want to say that there were times this season where we go extremely defensive against some of the bigger teams, and it really didn't work out. And I'm not sure why we did that after, in the previous season, being pretty successful, getting wins over City, United, Tottenham, I think Arsenal. And it was a weird deviation in the style of play. So something to keep in mind there. There are some negatives to Vieira's run at Palace. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that he got fired, and the manager who replaced him did a better job than Vieira. Roy Hodgson came in and immediately got Crystal Palace out of relegation trouble. Now, to be fair, if you look at the run of games from when before Vieira was fired and when Hodgson took the job, if you were just going to point at a spot in the schedule and say that's when the team's fortunes would turn around, bringing in a new manager probably wasn't the cause. but I think the team did actually look better under Roy Hodgson, and it was performing a lot better. But it goes beyond that. There were some more issues I want to get into at Vieira's time at Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace is a bit of an interesting team right now because we have like 6 players who I think could compete for a spot with just about any team in the world, and then the rest of the squad deserve to be in relegation battles. So, like Gahey and Anderson at the back, 2 very strong center backs, which is why it might not have been the best decision for Chris Richards to go to Crystal Palace. Then Decore ahead of him in midfield does a very good job. Zaha, Olise, and Eze are some very good players. Those 6 are very strong players. The rest of the team, outside of the goalkeepers, I think our goalkeepers are solid. They belong in relegation fights, like I said. Patrick Vieira dropped Eze midway through the season for seemingly no reason. I've tried to look into why this happened. I can only find conjecture by random sources. So it seems kind of just out of the blue, he dropped our best player, and that coincided with a really bad run of games. And to make matters worse, the second Roy Hodgson came in, he brought Eze back to the team, and he was a huge part of us avoiding relegation. You know, our manager having a completely random feud with one of our best attacking players, that's a big issue that Berhalter had. And that's not something I like out of Vieira because him dropping Eze like that cost us points. And whatever reason there was behind it, it cost him his job as well, whatever point he was trying to make. So that's one big issue that I have with Vieira from his time at Crystal Palace. Another is that Vieira may be a bit too loyal to his system. It's a pretty small sample size, but back in the first season, we loaned Conor Gallagher in from Chelsea, and he was a huge part of his success. The pressing that he had and his ability in the final third was a huge part of not only our relatively good form of the league, but the FA Cup run. I mentioned him missing that Chelsea game was being a big deal. It was. It was huge to not have him in the squad. And it was also huge when he wasn't here this season. I think that Vieira never really adjusted his play to not having Gallagher, to not having that just high energy guy in the midfield who'd advance, bring the ball forward, be good in the final third. I think he might have been a bit too low to his system and not changed the style of play when it was clear that we were missing him. Now, again, I mentioned before that he might have tailored his style of play to Crystal Palace, or maybe that was just what he had at his disposal. But being too loyal to a system that wasn't working, again, it's a big problem that I had with Greg Berhalter. And a couple more smaller things with Vieira that I feel like I should bring up. While he was at Crystal Palace, like the U.S., we weren't able to really get a striker going. Like the U.S., we didn't really have a talented striker. Well, the U.S. has one now. But I feel like I should mention that it was an issue for the U.S., and I think it was an issue I saw at Crystal Palace not having a striker who was able to really score goals. And in addition, as mentioned before, the preseason we had this year was kind of a disaster. I don't think that's on Vieira at all, but I do want to mention that a little bit because we have had some weird scheduling things in the U.S. in the past. Remember the Frostbite game? But I just wanted to bring that up. But I think the bigger issues are how he dropped Eze completely randomly, which I feel like that is a big deal and why he was not like he wasn't fired because he dropped Eze, but Eze would have helped us have good results to prevent him from being fired and not really replacing Gallagher and not tailoring the system to adjust to not having him. Overall, with Vieira, I liked him at his time at Crystal Palace. I liked the way the team was playing, and I wouldn't have been mad if he was given more time. But I think I like him in the way that I like Ethan Ampadu, where I go like, Chelsea should really give him a chance. I think he's got some talent. I love if he got a good run out with them. But when Chelsea sell him, it's not going to be like, oh man, they did him dirty. It's like, no, I see a why. It's understandable. Like, I do like the creativity that Vieira was able to display and the attacking play after 4 years of Roy Hodgson. And, like, Hodgson, he did a great job keeping the team up in that time. But, it could be a bit of a drag to watch the team. And having Vieira come in just brought new life into the club. And I'm really appreciative of him for that. But at the same time, I don't think that he adjusted his style of play without Gallagher. And I'm still very concerned about how he just randomly dropped Eze, despite him being one of our best players. So I think there are some concerns that I have, but if he came into the team, I think he'd obviously be a big upgrade on our former manager. And I'd be excited to see what he can do. I'd be excited to see if Pulisic could take a step forward, if Tim Way could look good, what Gio Reyna could do, if the players have a response to being coached by a legend of the game, as opposed to like obviously like every single U.S. manager we've had has had a storied career. Like even like Greg Berhalter, like he was a World Cup player. That's a huge deal. But Vieira is a bona fide all-time great. So I wonder if that would be a different reaction to some of the players. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to talk about. I mean, maybe it's because of how much I've watched him. My expectations are kind of like, yeah, I mean, I think he'd be fine. He had some time in the U.S. with NYCFC. That's a good connection there. And I think he's fine, but it's certainly not too exciting of a choice. And I really don't think there's that much of a difference between appointing him and appointing Jesse Marsh. But I'd be excited to see what Vieira can do. And yeah, I think that's all I got to talk about. See ya.